Welcome everyone to the Hands-On CISO podcast. Today I am joined by Sean Turner, who's been in the security field for the past decade. Today we'll be talking about many different things, from how he got into the industry and up to what the day-to-day looks like. So Sean, nice to meet you.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Amazing. So before we get into anything else, how did you even get into security?
I think in common with a lot of people in the field, I just sort of fell into it. So, like, I was working in infrastructure engineering, and sort of I'd started specializing in DevOps, which people will have their arguments about whether it's a real thing. But essentially, I started working more closely with developers with an operational background for a few years. During my time at business school, and then subsequently at some startups and small businesses and various places. And I think one of the first, so my first non-academic related job, if you like, after leaving business school and running infrastructure there for several years, that's a fintech startup, a robo-advice startup. And their first challenge for me was like, hey, our investors, so people that are important to the success and continuance of the business, want us to get PCI DSS SAQD. I'm like, that's not really what you hired me for, but let me take a look. And from there, it was like, actually ended up through my year or so that I worked there, built their sort of DevOps and their pipelines for their building their application, and did all that sort of nice stuff. We're working with dev teams and making the infrastructure sing, but also worked with the senior management, the board, the investors on what security looked like at Wealth Wizards, as a firm was called. And which they've carried through. But my replacement then went on and implemented things that I'd recommended, and we did. Yeah, they started doing security and taking security seriously while I was there, doing it as a side desk project. And essentially, I was their information security lead, but probably without the C bit at the beginning of that time. I was essentially responsible for technology and then information security as a secondary activity. But then I went back into DevOps more heavily, went back into sort of Kubernetes stuff, and started specializing in that sort of container orchestration and scaling kind of problems for some larger businesses, and as part of contracts, and working for a consultancy for a brief period as well. So I went back out of security for a bit, but then got more heavily back into it later on. Because I took a job at another startup for, again, leading DevOps for this startup, and then they were like, "Hey, by the way, can you do all of the security stuff as well?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure, yeah, just maybe you should change my job title." So it was like, "Yeah, okay, you're now the CISO, make things happen." I was like, "Okay, thank you." That was the kind of empowerment and culpability that I needed to make the things happen. The title's a silly. Titles sound like a silly thing, but it's like every time we have this discussion, we're like, "Oh well, we want to hire you as information security manager," or, "Oh yeah, we don't want to intimidate sort of the CTO or whatever." And I'm like, "No, you hire me as a CISO and tell me that I'm responsible for security, and then when security goes wrong, you can blame me, and it'll be my responsibility to fix it. But there won't be any ambiguity. It won't be, oh yeah, by the way, this guy has, guy or girl has an opinion over here," and it's like, no, security stops, buck stops here, right? Let's put that one, get that one right, and then whatever other stuff I end up doing, because it's a startup, so be it.
Interesting. Do you think most startups start out that way? That it's like the person doing security is kind of someone who's not actually security, but kind of falls into there?
I think it depends on the nature of a business, or the size of a business. But I mean, if you consider the typical ratios between operational staff and development staff and security staff in a business, even in a fintech, security staff is going to be by far the smallest percentage. And so if there's only 20 of you and you've got a security person, and you're actually your percentage is up to like 5%, whereas in a larger business there might only be 1% of people working in security, or even less. even in a bank, because they have so many staff, the security team tends to be still quite small by comparison.
Mhm. And
So I think when it comes to a startup, if it's a very security focused startup and not necessarily a cybersecurity startup, so like if it's a pure play cybersecurity startup, they don't have a security. They don't often have a security person responsible for security for the business. They're just like, yeah, we sort of dog food this stuff, and they do it well or badly as the case may be. But if it's something where security is fundamental, and I think that's where the sort of the Twinstake thing came in with, if we get this wrong, we will lose business, we will lose clients, we will lose their faith and trust. More so than we're getting operational stuff wrong. We won't be able to compensate or reimburse people as well in the security space. We'll have lost our reputation, if you like. Kraken had a similar thing, the whole sort of we're the most secure exchange thing. But they have the luxury of having 100 people to work on that. But here it's a lot more hands-on. And yes, I think the ratios and the way it works for different types of startups, a lot of small businesses actually will get their security expertise from a fractional CISO or from an arrangement with a consultancy or from a managed security services provider or something like that. And then you become a certain kind of size or level of criticality before you actually end up having your own kind of dedicated security resource, who then can tap into those resources to grow without growing, if you like.
Joseph, how is being in the company that you started in different from what you're doing now in terms of like your day to day?
Oh, well, what are we defining as when I started? The first startup.
The one, the one that told you your security.
Yeah, I think it's chalk and cheese really. There we were building things that we were the typical kind of, this wealth was into a typical kind of building funded startup, building products for a market that we were either making ourselves or didn't exist yet. So it's a sort of robo advice back in 2016, building things that people weren't necessarily asking for, but we thought that there was going to become, kind of a market and a marketplace for. And you could see in recent years that's certainly happened. So taking something quite non-sexy, pension advice, and then turning that into an online offering. And there are lots of. It wasn't B2C, so there was consumer data there. There were data integrity considerations. There was a certain amount of concept of consumers actually paying us for the white labeled offering. So there were a few things there that don't exist in this institutional B2B space that I'm in now, around people's personal data, actually having users who are end users, and having, but also we also have the B2B relationship and the white label stuff as well. And I think the way in which it's similar, and the way in which all of these startups have been similar when it comes to leading in security, have been that your number one customer is almost the investor, in terms of getting security right. In that if you don't get security right, that might be who you lose first. And if you lose the investor, depending on the stage of your business, that can hurt quite a lot. Certainly, it would have made Wealth Wizards fall pretty flat. They were very funding driven, very high burn rate. At the time that I started securing crypto facilities for the Kraken acquisition, it was essentially the acquisition that was on the line. If we didn't get security right, if we'd been hacked and not had our security right during the sort of 6 months between finding out about the acquisition and the acquisition actually happening, it may not have completely shuttered the acquisition, but it may have affected the bottom line. It may have affected the acquisition price, or changed the terms of the deal in some way. And it probably would have had a very negative impact on my role as well, because I went on and worked for Kraken for a subsequent 3 years in senior positions. And clearly, if a startup I was working for at the time of acquisition had been hacked already, that might not have played out quite the same way. So that was higher stakes all round.
Oh, and what was your, like, right now, what does your actual day to day look like? What is the kind of work that you do?
I mean, today isn't a great example because today was like pick apart some things that happened on Friday and over the weekend for a post-mortem, not in the security space, but in the operational space. Followed by having to do a little tiny bit of daddy daycare because my wife had some appointments, and then sort of prepping for this and figuring out what the next steps are with that post-mortem type stuff, as well as I had a couple of outstanding tasks on Friday, which were more security related around some credentials to save and checking that some day-to-day processes were working correctly, because they don't get looked at as closely over the weekend. They still get looked at, but not like with a magnifying glass. And on the back of the incident, I think over the weekend actually to look more closely at a couple of things this morning, which are very close to the infrastructure, very much like individual contributor level stuff. But then I'm also concurrently preparing our strategy for the next quarter because we're towards the end of Q2 here. So that's happening. Well, to be honest, that's already happened weeks ago, but it's still in the notes on my phone, so I haven't really prepared it yet. And so you kind of you chop and change. Contacting a supplier about getting some stuff delivered by the end of the week that we need for the data center, because just like some of my other roles, I've kind of inherited some infrastructure responsibility based on. It's actually because if you work at a startup and you've got more than one hat that you can wear, then you often find that you're required to wear more than one of those hats to get the job done and make sure that the business is pushing along as sinking as nicely as it can. So I've had to do a lot more infrastructure stuff recently. We put a little bit of security stuff on the back burner, and I think we've had the luxury of being able to do that because we got it right for the first 18 to 20 months, and got all that stuff in place so that now my strategic items look a lot less scary than basically implement everything from scratch, implement single sign-on MFA. We have gone from we have nothing to actually now we're just refining and honing and improving things and making incremental improvements, which is a challenge in itself because I think to a certain extent the business then expect like big strategic projects and you're like, well, actually it'd be nice if we could just go back and reflect on all of this stuff that we already did and just tweak a few things. And go a bit tactical for a little while. It's like, yeah, but what are you actually going to achieve? What are your deliverables? It's like, well, I just want to make sure everything's working before I carry on, But we've got our own challenges in the sort of the startup fundraising space to deal with, and regular questionnaires and DDQs from interested parties, customers, investors alike, to keep us on track and keep us honest. And every time we write something in one of those DDQs, like as a response, I'm then tasked with making sure that whatever we wrote in that response reflects reality. So if it says, oh, by the way, when they say, oh, do you have this? I say, well, no, we don't have it, but we're implementing it in Q3. So, okay, well, that probably better go on the roadmap.
Nice. Would you say it's correct to say that most of your days are kind of like the things that happen and it's more that every day is different than the other?
Well, yeah, I mean, some of them are planned out in advance, and there'll be a day full of meetings occasionally. Thankfully, quite occasionally. That is the style of business we're doing here. There'll be days where I travel somewhere for something, a conference, or to meet with colleagues or whatever. So some of the stuff is well known in advance. Some of the activities have to be done, but don't have to be done at any specific time. And some things that happen at work, at the office, if you like, the office virtual, require a response. So there's a mix, a blend of tactical and strategic stuff and reactive and proactive work that's probably approaching 50-50 for me now. But in the past, it's been way different to that. It's been sort of 95-5 or 10-90 the other way, depending on what week of the year it is, what's current, what we're planning to do. And we spent a couple of weeks on some stuff that was purely strategic, and some of it was, what's the word? Some of it was sort of some of it wasn't necessarily going to come off, but it required us to put a lot of effort in anyway. So yeah, sometimes we're preemptive and proactive, and other times we're just people saying, "Oh, can you do this by the end of the week?" And it's about 3 days' work spread across 3 or 4 people. But most people have still got other stuff to do, and one of those people's probably me. So yeah, but there'll be all hands to the pump kind of events, as well as carefully planned out, and plans change. No plans, favorite quote: "No plans survives first contact with the enemy." There's not always an enemy in this context, but I guess the enemy is usually time when it comes to that. No plan survives Monday morning, right? And you think, well, this week I'm going to achieve this, and then you get to the end of the week, it's like, well, I achieved absolutely none of that. But here are the metrics for what we did achieve in terms of revenue improvements. It's like, okay, yeah. So we did all this. We put those things first because growing the business has always been quite top of our list. It's not, as a security person, it shouldn't always be, but as somebody pulling the same way as everybody else in the startup is, if that's what you need to survive and to make and to justify the things, to justify the projects you want to do next quarter, you've got to grow this quarter, right? So it's finding that balance of it. It's true for all technology and leadership functions, and finding a balance between getting things right, dotting the I's, crossing the T's, and then growing at crazy pace so that you keep up with the competition, or preferably beat the competition, and become, keep a business as a viable and fast growing opportunity for people, and keep it an interesting place to work as well. I wouldn't have it another way.
So kind of doing everything at the same time and doing it the best you can.
Yeah, and knowing what stuff you can deprioritize, knowing what stuff's nice to have, going, well, look, this is my roadmap and this is what I'm going to do. And when you get to the point where you haven't really delivered all of that, and you think, well, okay, the bits that we deprioritized, the whole landscape changed. It doesn't take a quarter for the landscape to change. It can take a week for the landscape to change around this stuff. Working in crypto is no 2 days or weeks or months are the same. Things go in and out of fashion. And, we had some projects to like, oh yes, let's harden and improve the infrastructure of this, and then we find out that that's actually a waning part of our business, and other parts of the business are just exploding, like going bigger and bigger at the same time. It's like, well, okay, let's harden the infrastructure for that, and leave the other one till afterwards, but make sure we don't miss it completely, because we have to maintain things working and things secure, but we also have to maintain consistency across that. And so it's like, well, whatever we did, whatever we piloted, whatever we POC for this project, we need to make sure we now apply that consistently across all the other projects. And that's more of the grown-up CISO thinking.
What's the other version of CISO?
Just sort of, the naive startup. Oh yeah, we'll just do that. We'll finish implementing that and it will work. And it's like, oh, you'll finish implementing that and you'll have grown your maintenance overhead for things that need to be looked at so they carry on working. Every time you implement something and you go, yeah, okay, that's all shiny, it works, it's fantastic, you then have to think, actually, and I'm going to have to revisit that in about 3 or 4 weeks to make sure it's still working, it's still fantastic. And then I'm going to have a regular cadence of like, all this stuff that needs revisiting, and the pile of stuff that needs revisiting just grows and grows and grows. And that sort of BAU capability. I think a part of doing this stuff, lean, is lean a good word for this? Doing lean security, if you like, is selecting the products that don't have the massive overhead, selecting the things that just work and just run by themselves, and that don't require you to hire 3 people to run it, or host it yourself and run it in a data center, but then knowing where it's not acceptable to do that. And there were some lines drawn at the back end. It was like, okay, so security software has to be self-hosted. And that was just a rule that ruled out some of the products we wanted to use. It may have been relaxing, so I'm not sure. But then it's like, okay, so other software, crazily other software like personnel management software, so stuff where you actually got a massive attack surface was hosted was SaaS, but then the software used to scan the stuff for security purposes was self-hosted. It's like, which almost felt like the wrong way around sometimes. It's like, actually, you know what, this is what we're trusting with our staff data, which is actually really important. Not for me to question those decisions. Just the top of it felt a bit off, but then the security actually went and found problems with the SaaS offering and reported them back to the SaaS provider and said, "Here are the problems with your software." And I was like, "Okay, that's quite a mature security team at this point."
Wow. How do you keep on top of like everything that keeps changing in the cyber field? I feel like all the time there's new things coming out and different things are happening, and at the same time you have all your things that you already have to do regardless. Like, how do you balance both learning new things and doing the things that you already know you need to do?
I think a combination of half a dozen WhatsApp, Telegram, Signal channels, LinkedIn. There's not really much useful information on Twitter, I don't find, but LinkedIn is valuable. Actually, some of my intelligence about security I get from the BBC News app on my phone, which tells me about some things before the security community know about them.
Explain.
I just like, such and such got hacked, and because and it'll happen in US sort of daytime. The press release will happen in US daytime, so the BBC News app on my phone pings me, and I won't. If I just relied on security industry communication in the UK, I'd get that like 9 a.m. the following morning. So I got a few hours of heads up there. Obviously, I've then got more noise and more things to look at, but I don't just have the news app on my phone for security, right? I have it just for general interest. So some of the things are just having your head in the right space and having the right things going on around you, being in the right groups of people and surrounding yourself with the right people, having the right connections on LinkedIn, and being proactive about that. I think the right connections on LinkedIn, it helps if you've got, the guy that used to be the head of GCHQ on your LinkedIn, because then you're going to see what he's posting, what current thinking is in national security, and you're not going to get that kind of level of value from looking at NCSC's website, right? I guess, and then if you can, attending in-person events. So daytime event probably once a month, evening event 2 or 3 times a month. Obviously, it helps if you can travel to somewhere like London or wherever's your nearest sort of major hub for that. In the UK, London's good. Manchester's sort of okay. Birmingham's a bit quiet. Generally, I live near Birmingham and ended up traveling to London and back a lot anyway. I now live closer to London, so that's useful. But yeah, so getting that kind of in-person touch points, organisations either belonging to organisations or just following and learning from the practice of organisations. OWASP in particular. So I'm a chapter lead for OWASP Peterborough, along with a couple of other people who run sort of Peterborough, Cyber Peterborough, if you like. So that's handy, although it's more of a social thing, and I don't think we have quite as formal a knowledge sharing stuff going on there as in other communities that I'm aware of. OWASP in general has quite a strong knowledge sharing thing, and again, OWASP London is huge and incredible scale and quality of presentations and stuff we would never try to compete with as a chapter. CSA is similar, so the CSA UK chapter, which I'm the co-chair of and actually the acting chair of because the chair is on maternity leave. We don't do as much as the CSA globally, the Cloud Security Alliance globally, but what we do is more UK specific and more sort of tailored to our audience, and we'll have different themes and stuff. So while the CSA Global are going off and you're doing this massive AI push, They're doing AI and crypto, not big style. We're still focusing on identity management and cloud security and sort of SaaS security and those kind of sort of more niche areas, but are more relevant to some of the maturity levels of the businesses that we work with. So we're not necessarily working with like the hugest, the biggest businesses in the world here, and they have challenges at the more basics, a bad word, foundational level to deal with before they start getting obsessed with AI. Get the basics right first. So you learn to walk before you try and run.
How much do you see AI? I've been hearing a lot of different things from CISO about like how much does AI actually affect your day? Is interesting to you? Like, do you deal with anything related?
It's been of interest to me for many years, and I know there are going to be lots still coming out of the woodwork to say that, but I've been attending sort of AI meetups since about 2018, 2019, basically since the inception of the meetup. And we used to do hands-on sort of hacking sessions, learning how to do stuff with language models and how to do a bit of basic data science, crack open a Jupyter notebook and make something happen, which was useful and is sometimes useful in my day job, just real basic like Python stuff. The sort of the large language model, kind of like hype cycle AI stuff. Some of my peers and colleagues have been using it to write some code, which works to a varying degree. And generally speaking, it becomes a prompt engineering exercise in that if you know what you want the code to do, and you can be very specific about it, it will write the code. And then we had a great one the other day because we got ChatGPT to write something that we knew exactly what it was supposed to do, or at least I did. And my colleague wrote it, and I said, "Well, that's not quite right. I'll tweak it a bit." So I tweaked it a bit, but he fed it back through ChatGPT, but it was written in Bash, and I said, "Look, this would be much easier for me to play with if it was written in Python." So then just got ChatGPT just to translate the entire logic of the thing from one language to another, and I was like, that would have taken me ages. And that's an incredibly good use case for it. Is you take something that can be automated, that's succinct, that's already well described enough. So what the best way of describing a piece of code is to write the code. That's the only real way of describing like software, is to actually, it's like, oh yeah, we'll get AI to write the code, yeah, but who's going to write the prompts for the AI to write the correct code? And that's a different generational paradigm when it comes to AI. That's not. It takes you out of machine learning, takes you out of your large language model, and building a model based on information that's already on the internet into sort of more machine reasoning and explainable stuff. And those areas haven't improved as much. Everything's sort of around this sort of, hey, let's get a big pile of GPUs and put the internet in one side and get this clever thing out the other side. But the whole sort of, let's improve how the AI thinks. Let's take it from toddler level reasoning with a brain the size of a planet to behaving more like a human adult when it comes to when you ask it to do stuff, and when it comes to the ethics around what you ask it to do, and not being able to fool it into doing things it shouldn't do. We haven't managed to delete any of its naivety, and we shouldn't expect to have managed that, because it is essentially like training a child. And you train the child on the contents of Twitter, and you don't get a very pleasant child, unfortunately. So you then have to put some controls around that. And I'm aware of people, you sort of, some well-known people in the security community are creating products around AI security and doing some fairly high-level consulting around that stuff. So Gaddy Everon, Denise Cruz are starting to push into this space. And there's a couple of other practitioners who have gone, well, let's take AI and make it safer, and let's make it safer so that it's more secure. This is with a understanding and appreciation of the distinction between safety and security in the first place. Let's make it safer so that it is more secure. But on the other hand, let's sample ad sets some filters so it's more secure without having to make the AI itself safer. You can actually wrap some stuff around it, and another peer of mine just said, well, we just put our DLP software, so data loss prevention, if that's what it's called these days, software in front of ChatGPT, in front of like a business version of ChatGPT, so that people couldn't paste stupid things into it. And if they try and paste like, a customer database in there and say, can you take this database without anonymizing it, the DLP will go, ping, no, you can't do that. I'm not going to pass this ChatGPT because it's full of sensitive stuff. That was Jim Newman that described that, and that was 9 months ago he was talking about it, so it must have been like a year ago. But yeah, we describe this basic system for allowing people to use it without worrying about what they're, worrying about A, what they might put in there, and B, training them what they should and shouldn't put in there. But for applications like any crunch the numbers off the internet, so our sort of, because we've been using it for like generating scripts to do crypto metrics, and all the data is public in the first place. We're not putting our client names in there. We're putting addresses of validators and stuff in there, and all that stuff's on the public blockchain. So that clashing together of crypto and AI, it's like, well, all the data is public, so AI can have a field day with crypto, data about crypto. And there are some clever applications of that to actually tracking and tracing where crypto is going. You're doing the flow analysis of crypto, and all what sort of chain analysis have been doing since the early days. Elliptic and people like that took over, doing some similar stuff for essentially making crypto, I don't know if it's more secure, but more auditable and more tenable for national governments to allow it to continue to exist, and not try and regulate it out of existence. Sort of applying AML and KYC to crypto, which is a heavy focus of what we're doing. But we consume most of that stuff as a service. We're not building that stuff ourselves yet. So the sort of crypto compliance stuff, we'd largely partnering with people and staying with our own, staying with what our business does, which is running crypto validators as well as possible. But we are starting to get requests around the compliance space that are becoming more sophisticated, becoming not just, hey, who does this money belong to in the first place? It's more like, where has this money been, and stuff like that. And you sort of your global sort of sanctions landscape and all of that stuff plays into those considerations when your clients are worried about putting funds on a public ledger, and what they might be mixing them with. Not mixing as in a literal crypto mixer, but what they might be seeing side by side with on a validator or something.
If I go back a few minutes ago, you were talking about like what people who work at the company can do and can't do. And like in terms of honest mistakes, like people who do things that could harm the security. How much of how much really is the responsibility in the hands of education, like explaining to people what they can and can't do, versus automation of, we know people are going to make mistakes, so we're going to make sure they can't?
Yeah, so the insider threat landscape is an interesting one, because I know somebody put together something about it the other day. One of my peers, I forget who, said something about accidental, sort of naive versus intentional versus actually with someone else. So sort of like your APT, advanced persistent threat, their laptop's been hacked. So it's the user's identity has been used, but not the user themselves. That's the one where your technical controls are going to come in stronger. But there's still some awareness there. Don't go to stupid websites. Don't use different browser profiles. Use a different browser for some stuff. Don't do really stupid things on your work laptop. That kind of like, if you have a work laptop or whatever your work device is, don't download malware don't download hacked stuff on your work device, which sounds like common sense, but I mean, it's good to reinforce that common sense with some learning.
Well, I recently heard, I was talking to a CISO and he told me that someone in his company, one of the people like higher up, was using Grammarly without talking about it. And like he didn't think it was a problem. And then suddenly it came up and it was like a whole thing of how we should have gone.
Yeah, so this is another category. So was that because Grammarly compromised in some way, or was it more
I
that?
don't think so. It was just about if you're once you're using Grammarly, Grammarly has everything you write. Like
Yeah,
if
so
your data is not.
same with we recently had it with a code, an API testing sort of tool, where it turned out that they were uploading all the payloads to their cloud, even if you use the tool locally for analysis. And this is, there are lots and lots of SaaS companies that have lots and lots of data that they should or shouldn't have. And you sort of you have to have a level of tolerance of that if you want to use the product. So what you kind of hope is that the SaaS company, by looking at their compliance information, by talking to their security people if necessary, getting their sort of security reports,
But
have
that
a good enough security posture themselves not to get hacked and leak your information via it. So the third-party risk landscape is.
But that's assuming that you as a security person even know about that, because if someone in the company were to use it, yeah.
Yeah, so the idea of like knowing what your users are doing with their devices. We're not quite there yet, but it's bordering on sort of spyware. But also analyzing the data is not easy. So we rely on best in class anti-malware and some end user device controls, but they're quite light touch. I'm looking at some more sophisticated stuff that would stop people running things that could be malicious, but none of those things would pick out Grammarly as specifically as a vector, without you going into the control panel of those softwares, those agents, and actually inspecting and looking and saying, "Hey, this guy's got a Grammarly installed," and then thinking, "Oh, okay, that could be a problem because X." So that's it's a slightly different level of paranoia and integrity than we're currently applying. And I'm not saying it's not valid. What I'm saying is that you should get your more basic device controls in place first and worry about Grammarly a little bit later. More worried about people accessing things that they shouldn't, intentionally or otherwise, people compromising devices and users' accounts. Purely because those things happen more often. You look at the frequency. We always look at the likelihood or the probability of something happening as well as the impact, right? And the probability of a Grammarly thing is obviously really, really high, but the impact is potentially quite low, depending on what type of data it is they're using it for. And if it's to help with them writing a report, how sensitive is the report? Is the report sort of confidential? And so James McKinley would love this one because he would point out that you then need to label your stuff. You have to get obsessed with labeling things as like confidential or private, or which I kind of agree with, but I don't work in the same sector as he has been. And that kind of like, if it's confidential, don't use Grammarly on it. If it's sort of if it's sort of business wide access, then maybe Grammarly is fairly safe. But yeah, if you are processing things that are genuinely confidential, and it's fairly rare that something would be classed as confidential rather than restricted in most sort of private sector environments. Confidential would probably mean that you're doing work for something that has a higher level of integrity, or a government agency or something. It can be company confidential, but that's more that we usually class that as restricted rather than confidential. This is like shouldn't go outside of business versus should only be seen by very specific people. And that's the sort of thing that you shouldn't be allowing them to use Grammarly on. whether you can do that through a technical control or whether you do that through education. The good thing is, if there are people working with genuinely confidential stuff, that's going to be a smaller audience to educate, and you can put them through some additional training and tailor that to them and that use case, rather than having to have the whole company understand, what it is they're working on and why it shouldn't go through that sort of software.
What would you say currently is the biggest issue or threat in cybersecurity?
I don't know. I'm still kind of deciding between sort of naivety and naivety when it comes to people, but when it comes to businesses, there's a stronger level of the naivety, which is basically carelessness. That there are businesses that are genuinely careless about cybersecurity, but they don't. It's not even on their radar. They don't. And some of these businesses are entrusted with crazy things like the blood records of millions of patients and what diseases they may have and what their blood test results are and where they live and what their date of birth is and all of those things we use as identifiers for these people. Or somebody's, big companies losing people's pension data. I mean, that's a personal one. So the same company that lost my USS pension data also lost my Coventry City Council tax records. And both of those things were compromised by the same threat actor against the same third party business that didn't get things right. And they're a huge business who awarded government contracts left, right, and centre, who passed all of the government sort of controls, and yet they just don't do it right. They just don't take it seriously enough. And their answers to that of turning around and giving people like, "Hey, we'll buy you an Experian license for a year." It's like, seriously. That's not good enough for literally losing not only the pension thing was a real gauntlet for me, because I was like, you not only lost my identity, my information, personal information, including fairly sensitive information, salary details, and where I live, date of birth, and when I'm retiring, and all that sort of stuff. You also lost my beneficiary information, so you've lost my children's information to criminals, to threat actors who are using this information to hack people and compromise people. And it's just a horrible, horrible place to be, and a horrible thought of like, how do you get that so wrong? How do you get that so badly wrong when and so yeah, I think just about general like blase, it'll be fine. We can get away with it. Give an example, massive cloud data warehouse company, recent news. And it doesn't enforce MFA controls on customer accounts because that's a customer's responsibility. And Amazon used to have the same problem. They used to not enforce MFA on Amazon Web Services and say it was a customer's responsibility. And then so many people got hacked through S3 compromises and stuff. They just went, actually, we can't really just wash our hands of this and say it's a customer's responsibility anymore. Literally every company in the world is being popped by somebody looking at their Elastic or their S3 information they made publicly accessible because they didn't know what they were doing. So the default to secure thing, so that you take, but the SaaS providers and the infrastructure as a service providers, they're protecting against the naivety in some way, having those technical controls. Did that answer the question?
Well, yes, it answered what you think is the biggest problem right now. But I'm wondering, like, when you tell me all that, I'm thinking, but these companies must have CISOs, I'm assuming, right? So, like, what are they thinking? What is happening, and how does that work?
I don't really know. I some of them don't. So there's one particular example, which I will not name, that did not have a chief information security officer, was responsible for a third-party attack against the NHS, which caused quite a large amount of problems. I'd spoken with someone there about the concept of them probably needing one, informally. they hired someone to do that role 6 months after they got hacked, as an interim, and then later as permanent, to secure their business, because they weren't taking it seriously. So they had some interesting problems, some of which were visible from a physical appraisal of their office, shall we say.
What do you think are the big problems of CISOs who aren't aware? Like, what keeps you up at night?
So I think when you see big companies, CISOs, CSOs, people responsible for security for large businesses, and you've never seen what their posts on social media are about, how obsessed they are with security. You've not seen, none of your connections have ever commented or liked one of their LinkedIn posts, and you think, this person's not part of the community, are they? They're part of some echo chamber where they think they're doing everything by the book, and they've accepted the risk, and they've got their spreadsheet, but they're not living it. They're not day in, day out, have finger on the pulse, know what's going on the outside, and then on the inside, this is a presumption because I don't know how they're behaving internally. But I imagine, and having worked in some larger businesses in the past, they've got like a strictly defined sort of, they've got boundaries where they're not supposed to step across internal politics type blockers around, well, you can't have access to that to audit it, or you don't get enough access to our public cloud presence to know whether the permissions are set right in the first place. You'll have to hire a team to scan that from the outside, or you'll have to engage with a consultancy to buy 3 weeks of pen testing to see if this thing's secure from the outside, because we won't let you come and look at the controls because we're a different team, a different silo of the business. And I've had that sort of thing described to me by people who worked for banks and larger sort of high integrity financial institutions, again, informally and colloquially. And generally speaking, the people describing those things to me have been the people trying to do something about it and fix them, which is a good thing. But some of them, in their frustration, either just retired or retired or gave up and went and worked somewhere else. And we have quite a give up and go and work somewhere else ethos in the community. It seemed like. And it's not always voluntary, giving up and going working somewhere else. It's more like, you worked there for 2 years, you didn't achieve anything. You're worried about the security posture of the business you work for. Someone makes you a better offer, so you go to a better place, and the best people go to the businesses that are already taking security seriously, as opposed to the ones who are falling by the wayside. So you just compound the problem then, and I don't see job listings from the companies that I would worry about. I see job listings from the companies that I know and love already, and I know are already doing security right, and just see one of my peers go and get employed there as somebody that is already part of a community of people that are getting it right, as opposed to. So it's the opposite problem. There's no fresh blood going in there. It's just people moving around, and the US CISO community has this a little bit more than the UK one, I think. People moving around, moving from one job to another, and leaving something in their wake. And sometimes it's really good things they leave in their wake, but there's still a problem with that attrition. In that, if you work at a really big company, you see this quite a lot. If you work at a FANG type company, Facebook, Apple, whatever it stands for, and you start a project and it's your project and it's your baby, your initiative, and then you leave, sometimes the project just fizzles out. And imagine that happening to half a dozen security projects, but the outgoing CISO thought was important because they spent 2 years learning the context of what needed to be secured in the business, and the new one comes in and goes, yeah, well, that was the last guy. This guy or girl, sorry, but yeah, let's start from this time, and then HR are about wrong people to blame, but the human resources environment in which these people are leaving doesn't always have the kind of handover. Let's make sure that the incoming person knows what the outgoing person was doing. Sometimes just because of bad timing, sort of inconvenient sort of admin problems, but other times genuinely because they don't want the new person to know what the old person was worried about. It's just terrifying, but it happens. I have seen that one kind of firsthand, and got into an organisation, accepted a role at an organisation, and worked there for 2 days. Pointed out a number of problems, and then been asked to go and find a job somewhere else.
Really?
And you think, well, that's not only a horrible situation for me at the time, but also like, good luck to them.
Wow, that's scary to think about. Like,
But what the monkeys thing, right? See no evil, hear no evil. Which one are you guys? Oh, you're all of them. Okay, maybe I need to find a job somewhere else.
Yeah. I'm so glad you did.
Yeah, it was almost voluntary, but it ended up being forced, so it was quite entertaining.
I'm assuming that if you're a person who actually cares about security, then you kind of like you don't want to be working there at all once they say something like that.
I was genuinely told by a multinational business that was sold for £1 at some point, not to worry about the unencrypted, unauthenticated NAS drive in the corner of the office with customer details on it, because when I was in DevOps, because I wasn't there for that, to worry about that. That was someone else's problem. I was like,
Nice.
time to start looking for another.
Okay, so well, I'm gonna ask you one last question. What do you think this field, the cybersecurity field, is gonna look like in a few years in relation to everything you've told me so far and anything else that you think will affect it?
I don't think a lot's going to change at the top, but I think there are going to be some changes when it comes to how people consume services, maybe their expectations of certain services. Some things are coming to light about how some services are being sold and bought, which is going to involve a little bit more scrutiny of how decisions are made, even in the private sector, I think, because certainly in the public sector where people aren't supposed to do things like accept bribes or whatever we call them. So yeah, there's some of that's happening at the moment, and that's becoming quite a current problem. But I think expectations are going to go up in terms of like when you actually buy a product, it's supposed to work, and have some hand holding of the implementation, and even at the smaller end of the spectrum, the whole sort of buy our product and you just get what you see on the tin, and there won't be any onboarding, and there won't be any sort of hand holding. There's the support, support is by email only. That's going to start to be sweated out of the industry a little bit, I think, because people are going to want more. They're going to want, to interact with at least a chatbot, but then have a human being at the other end of the line if the chatbot can't fix it for them. Rather, as we get in financial services now, but in the security industry we don't. It's more like open a ticket, but I've had tickets open with vendors for months and months and months. There's going to be a little bit more expectation around that. I think the security industry is going to have to start doing a bit better, or word starts to spread a lot quicker these days, it seems. About there are a lot of exposés and articles and stuff out there, and people are like, oh yeah, it'd be interesting, the whole community, we're going to tell you about this, and carefully written so they don't get sued kind of things keep popping up, and sometimes they pop up and then they disappear again, as with the winter weather focused data warehouse people. And one of the articles written about them, the article popped up and then got torn down again. Obviously, there were probably hundreds of copies of the article made before it was torn down the same day. And so, yeah, things do get kind of outed a bit more. You're starting to see some of the people that were a bit sort of holding back a bit because they were. Bear in mind, the security industry is growing older, right? because there's not a lot of fresh talent. There's not as much as there needs to be anyway. And the security industry with the concept of a CISO came about in what, 90s or something. I've got the history of it somewhere. Essentially, the first person to call themselves a chief security officer, chief information security officer. And so you think, well, those first people that were CISOs in their 20s and 30s are now starting to get to retirement age. Some of them are quite well off and have opinions, and some of them have held those opinions back for a long time to draw a paycheck, and are now starting to. So I've seen quite a lot of the older chaps on my LinkedIn are starting to. I think it was all men, but the 50s, 60-year-old category is almost all men, which is another problem, but not something we can do anything about retrospectively. Are all starting to sort of, yeah, by the way, did you know about this? And it's like, no. Yeah, okay, that's interesting. Thanks for that one. And of course, you go onto their profile, and it's like they just left the job where they weren't allowed to say anything about it, and then waited the 3 months for for whatever to close out, and their sort of non-disclosure stuff to time out or whatever. It's similar to the Trump thing where the guy's non-disclosure agreement timed out after 10 years or 20 years or whatever, and he went, yeah, by the way, all those things I've not been allowed to talk about for the last 20 years. Some stuff starting to come out of the wash now, security industry-wise. So I think there's an interesting prediction for you that more stuff's going to start coming out, like people are going to have to start behaving themselves a bit more in the vendor space. Just start in the vendor space.
Thing overall.
It could be, but it could be, but again, it's like some people are used to certain things, and some things have always been done that way, which is a horrible turn of phrase. But yeah, so I think my prediction is there'll be some disruption, but it might not be by AI.
You heard it here. Wow, interesting. Well, thank you so much, Sean. This has been so interesting. I feel like you have a very energetic approach to the field. It's really cool. Amazing.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much for being here and sharing all your knowledge, and it was so fun learning from you.
Nice to meet you, Addy. Thanks for having me on.
Amazing. Okay, I'm gonna stop the recording.
Cool.